Today, I want to talk about the increasing trend of ethical software licenses. Now, before we get into this, I just want to say that I don't care if you want to use a specific license. That's entirely your business, go ahead and do it. The point of this video is to explain why this license is completely impractical and isn't going to achieve what you want it to achieve. When it comes to the question of ethics in software and the ethical use of software, I'm squarely in the camp that a piece of software is completely independent from the people who are actually using it. So what I mean by this is, let's say that you have a piece of CCTV software, for example. One way you can go and use this is you can go and use it to set up a CCTV system for your house to make sure that if someone breaks in, you have their face on camera so you can go and report them to the police. I'm sure nobody's going to complain about this use case, but you could also use that same piece of software to go and spy on all of the citizens of a country. And I'm sure a lot of people have a serious problem with this use case, but that doesn't mean that there's a problem with the piece of software itself. And if you're someone who wants to stop that second situation happening, I don't think that trying to do that at the licensing level is the correct place to do so. What we're talking about today is a growing software movement called the Ethical Source Movement, and the license we're specifically referring to is known as the Hippocratic License. Now, the Ethical Source Movement is responsible for making well-loved things like the Contributor Covenant. I'm not going to get into the Contributor Covenant today, that's for a whole nother video, but there are some people who have some serious complaints with the way it's structured. This movement has been responsible for things like campaigning against government organizations like ICE to stop them using open source software and to stop companies like GitHub actually working with them. Now, whether you agree or disagree with what they're trying to do, I don't think is really that important. However, I do think that if you do want to make some change in the world, this approach probably is the best way to actually go about it. The problem that I have is when they step into the licensing space, because you're not going to make any change with a software license. All it's going to do is affect regular users. So as they say here, for too long, we as software developers have divorced ourselves from the consequences of the code that we write. We have told ourselves that development is a pure and abstract pursuit. We have spent our careers writing programs with the goals of clarity, conciseness, readability, performance, and elegance. But we are starting to realize that the software we create has a real and lasting impact on the world in which we live. Politics and software are so tangled that they cannot be reasonably separated. And this last line is where I really disagree with them. Just as a hammer can be used to knock in a nail, it can also be used to knock in your head. Therefore, we should stop certain people from using hammers. The problem that we have here is that once you can't agree on basic fundamental principles in your argument, it's very difficult to actually have a proper discussion. And if you're a supporter of the free software movement or even the open source software movement, I don't think there's any way you can reasonably support the ethical software movement and the Hippocratic license, because it's basically antithetical to the initial principles. Now, why is that, you might be asking? So the Hippocratic license, as the name would suggest, is based upon the Hippocratic Oath. So the Hippocratic Oath is an oath that's still taken by many medical professionals in not all countries, but some countries still do use it. And basically it's to say that as a medical professional, you will try to use your skills to the best of your abilities to help the patients, which over time has made it gain the loose definition of do no harm. Now, because the Hippocratic Oath wouldn't exactly make sense for software, what they've decided to do instead is focus the license around the human rights as defined by the United Nations. Now, the TLDR of the license, because it is kind of a long license, I will leave a link to it down below. Basically, software that is licensed under the Hippocratic Oath cannot be used to violate human rights as defined by the UN. Doing so would be an infringement of the license and an infringement of the owner's IP, and would make this an illegal usage of the software. So let's go and look at some of the principles of open source software as defined by the Open Source Initiative. So what we have right here is points 5 and 6. Point 5 is no discrimination against persons or groups, and then point 6 is no discrimination against fields of endeavor. Now, I believe that both of these would be broken by stopping certain actions being done because they violate human rights. And the same is true with free software as well, where that also violates the first essential freedom, so freedom 0, the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose. Now, I'm not saying that violating human rights is a good thing, but I don't think that the software license is the correct place to be trying to stop this. If you don't like a certain group and you don't want them to be using your software or the software that you're supporting or software that you work on, anything like that, protesting it is a perfectly fine way to go and stop that. And when the ethical source movement is doing that, I don't agree with everything they're doing, but I do think that actually is a practical way to go and do stuff. The problem with the Hippocratic license, though, is it's just completely unenforceable in the real world. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate for just a moment, and let's say this license is perfectly good and everyone should be using it. Okay, so let's say that you decided to make a piece of facial recognition software. Now, this software doesn't have to be used for anything malicious. It could be used for doing things like, I don't know, categorizing pictures of your family so that you can have them in the correct folders. That's a perfectly reasonable use case. But let's say that, for example, an organization that wanted to do something malicious with it decided to use your source code and then not disclose it. Even though this is licensed under the Hippocratic license, what are you gonna do about it? Because unless the organization got audited, no one will ever know that's actually happening. Now, even if they do get audited, that doesn't mean that anything's actually gonna happen, because every single day, tech companies and governments are caught breaking the terms of various software licenses like the GPL, and nothing's really being done about it. Maybe they'll be slapped with a fine and they'll have to switch over to some different software, but ultimately, they don't really care. If they're going to do something malicious with the tool, why would they care about your software license? And let's say we move out of a Western context, out of countries like Australia and Europe and America, where these licenses may be enforced. What if we move to a country like, say, China or Russia? Why would they care about your license? Obviously they won't. They already don't care about the UN, so why would they care about your license based upon the UN's rules? Sure, maybe someone someday would be fine, but if you're just some, say, random GitHub project and the Chinese government or the Russian government decided to use your software licensed under the Hippocratic Oath to do malicious things, what can you do about it? You probably don't have enough resources to actually pay your devs, let alone taking an entire government to court. But let's move out of a government context and move to the individual. So there are already people who pirate software and games and music and movies. That's already breaking the agreement to actually use that piece of media. Why is it going to be different with this license? Now, someone who already knew about the Hippocratic license might be saying, hey Brodie, they've actually already addressed all the concerns that you had in the FAQ, and oh boy they did. These are some great answers that we have in here, so let's go and read them. Is the Hippocratic license open source? My answer to this is not a chance, not at all. It is the intention and belief of the author that the Hippocratic license is an open source license and that it meets the criteria of the open source definition. However, it has not yet been reviewed by the OSI, so a determination on its OSI approval status is pending. Now, I don't think that it's an open source license because it breaks points 5 and 6, especially point 6, the discrimination against endeavors, but they don't seem to think that. Doesn't the Hippocratic license violate the no discrimination and fields of endeavor terms of the open source definition? Those sections state that an open source license must not discriminate against any person or group of persons or against any field of endeavor respectively. No groups or fields are discriminated against by the Hippocratic license. People in the groups are welcome to use software under the Hippocratic license in their fields. The restrictions in the Hippocratic license target specific activities, not groups of people or fields of work. The restrictions apply equally to all people and all groups in all fields of endeavor, therefore the restrictions are not discriminatory in any way. The license specifically discriminates against breaking human rights. Whether that's a good thing or not is a whole nother story, but that's the specific purpose of the license. You can't say through legalese that's not what it's doing. And my favorite part of the FAQ is this question right here. Is the Hippocratic license enforceable? Enforcement is a legitimate concern, and we worked hard on this aspect of the license based on feedback from the community following its initial launch. Unlike many other licenses which rely on courts to settle issues of license violations, the Hippocratic license puts the power of enforcement directly in the hands of the code's creators, which means literally nothing, and it's still not enforceable. Ultimately, this license is only going to stop a very tiny fraction of people from doing anything malicious, and they probably weren't going to be doing anything, human rights level violation anyway. It's probably going to be people who just do something that's slightly bad with the software that's like, oh, I probably shouldn't use this software to do it because of the Hippocratic license, but it's not going to stop anyone who could do serious damage in the world. A license is not the correct way to try to do this. It's never going to work. But let me know, maybe I'm completely wrong, and this license actually will save the world and stop all of these bad things from actually happening. Ultimately, though, in my opinion, the only way you can actually stop people from using your software is there's one way to do it. It's to not release your software and only keep it to yourself. Maybe don't even put it on the internet, because if it's on the internet, maybe the source code will leak at some point, so just keep it locally on your system, maybe even a vault under the ocean, so no one can ever have it. So that's going to be everything for me. Before I go, I would like to thank my supporters. So a special thank you to Chris, Joachim, Donald, Michael, Andre, Nathan, David, Monza, Will, Brennan, Chica Bento, Jamie, Joseph, Mitchell, Peter D, Stephen, Tony, Tushar, and all of my $2 supporters. If you'd like to go support my work, them links down below to my Patreon, subscribe star, LibrePay, all of that sort of stuff. I've got my podcast, Tech Over Tea, available basically anywhere, and then this channel is available on Odyssey, Library, and BitChute if you want to watch on a platform that isn't YouTube. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.